afternoon, everyone. Happy Thursday. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Long-Term Vocabulary Retention for Adult ELLs through Retrieval Practices. First, before we get to the webinar, I'm going to introduce Robert Breitbart. Everybody knows Robert Breitbart from our partners at Burlington English. So Robert.
Thank you so much. And everybody knows Coabe. And when we're done today, everybody's going to know and totally love all the information that Betsy shares. You're genuinely in for a real treat. And if you know Burlington English, you know we've got just tons and tons of great resources for vocabulary. And since we're translated into about oh gosh, over two-thirds of the world's languages that are in use. Just know that we've got you covered too, and people understanding that vocabulary. But I did want to quickly follow up. We got a ton of reach out because in the what's looking to be the WIOA reauthorization, there's going to be heavy emphasis on not just digital literacy, but digital skills. So I just wanted to spend just a moment, sharing all that Burlington English has for building not just pure digital literacy, but digital skills. So as far as the digital literacy side, correlated for all the North Star digital literacy assessment and all of the basics that you'd think to get somebody up and running so that they can participate in class, they can participate, on Zoom, and they can be doing asynchronous work. So they've got you covered. But again, what we're hearing so much about is, but are they really able to use, digital tools and navigate a digital environment? So in Burlington, we've got you covered on that. And obviously, one of the best ways to learn vocabulary in context, if you want really long-term retention, well, guess what? We've got it built in to things that folks are really going to need in their daily lives, such as things like you see on the screen, like getting a job. So with that, hope you enjoy the webinar. We'd love to hear from you at burlingtonenglish.com/contact. So with that, I'll turn it back over to our hostess with the mostest, Bethel. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Burlington English, for always partnering with us and being a really valued partner throughout the year, as well as for conferences. So now I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Betsy Ljubic. Sorry, tried my best, Betsy. So I'll turn it over to you, and everybody enjoy the webinar.
Well, thank you so much, Bethel, and thank you to Robert and Burlington English for sponsoring this webinar. Today's webinar is called Long-Term Vocabulary Retention for Adult ELLs through Retrieval Practice. And my name is Betsy Ljubic, and I am currently in Baltimore, Maryland. I live in Maryland, and I work for the Maryland Department of Labor. So I need to read this disclaimer just to let you know that the contents and opinions expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect or present the views, positions, or policies of the Maryland Department of Labor, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations imply an official endorsement by the Maryland Department of Labor. And I'm grateful for my colleague, Ahu Moser, is here today, who is helping me monitor the chat. So I'm not going to talk a ton about myself and my background. I mentioned that I'm an adult education program specialist with Maryland Labor, but the biggest thing that I want you to know today is that even though my full-time job now is out of the classroom, I am still in the classroom. I am still adjunct faculty at Frederick Community College in Frederick, Maryland. Shout out to some of my FCC folks whose names I saw in the chat. Thank you for coming today. And I also teach, pre-academic and academic ESOL, as well as developmental English and English 101. So I have 22 years of combined experience teaching EFL overseas, English as a second language here in the US in high school, at the college level, as I mentioned, in adult ed. I can't teach the Title II classes now since I work for the funder, but still teach in some other ESL programs. So I think it's really important, when we're sharing about what's happening in the classroom, that it's really important that we stay current. And that's one of the ways that I really try to stay current, is by continuing to be in the classroom and trying things out. So the practices that you're going to hear today about spaced retrieval practice are things that I have done recently and tried and seen results from. So our learning objectives today is that we're going to define spaced retrieval practice, not assuming that everyone knows what it is. We're going to explore the problems that have occurred due to the lack of the use of spaced retrieval practice, and explain 3 classroom strategies which use spaced retrieval practice to help with long-term vocabulary retention. And you're actually going to have a chance to try one of those strategies out yourself. So you'll get to see a little bit of a demo by taking part in spaced retrieval practice yourself. I became aware of the research on spaced retrieval practice at a conference a few years ago by an organization called Research Ed, and they're a European organization. And it seemed like that this research was a lot more known in Europe and not as known or used or talked about in the US, which is the reason that I chose it as the topic for my presentation at the COABE conference in March. Research Ed seeks to bridge the gap between research and education, practical applications in the classroom. All right, so I did a survey in preparation for this presentation of 23 ESL instructors, and the only criteria for them is that they had to have been in the classroom teaching English learners in the past 5 years. So I asked them, have you heard of spaced retrieval practice or spaced retrieval practice? And 65% of them said that they had not, and almost 35% of them said that they had. The next question I asked them, or statement I asked them to respond to, is kind of interesting. I have used one or more of the following strategies: low stakes quizzes, brain dumps, think, write, pair, share, specifically for vocabulary retention. And it was almost flip-flopped, not even a little more so, that 91% said yes, that they've used one of those strategies, and about 9% said no. So my hunch is today that you may be like these instructors that filled out my survey, that maybe you have used one of the strategies we're going to talk about today that can be used for a lot of things in teaching English, but maybe you've even used it for teaching vocabulary, or for maybe you have even done spaced retrieval practice and you just don't know it. You probably for sure have done retrieval practice. And we'll talk about what the differences in those two terms are. All right, so I see somebody has your hand up. Is my sound okay and everything's okay? There will be a chance to respond throughout in the chat if you need something. But what I would like you to do now, and there are a lot of people on this webinar, so I'm just asking you to respond in the chat. We probably won't catch all the responses. But before I define retrieval practice and spaced retrieval practice, I just want to know, how much time do you devote to review of previous material in your classes, and what techniques do you use? And you can answer those in the same answer. So how much time do you devote to review, and what techniques do you use to do that? So we'll give you a little time to respond. Okay, 10 to 20 minutes, Kahoots, weekly review games. Not enough time, Quizlet app. 20 minutes in games, 30%, 30 minutes, 10 to 15%, more than 20 minutes, at least an hour before class, 25%, 50%, 30 minutes on most weeks, as much as needed. Jeopardy, Kahoot. Review is integrated. 30 minutes plus, recycling, okay. Every class gets review, but ones with new students enrolling monthly get more. Oh, rolling enrollment, that's always fun. 20 minutes, 20%, 30 to 45 minutes. 10-minute bell ringers. Quizzes, Bamboozle, Quizlet, yep. Daily, 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, Burlington. There you go, Robert. Got a shout out for Burlington. Yeah. All right, so you review, right? As teachers, we know the importance of bringing up material that has been learned before and reviewing it. So as we think about retrieval practice, this is what we're talking about. Retrieval practice is based on a hypothesis called the retrieval effort hypothesis, and this is just the active use and recall of new material. Or material that has been taught and then immediately, maybe the next day, reviewed. And so research has shown that the more difficult this process is, the more engaging and enriching the linguistic experience is for students. So think about that part, difficult and challenging. Okay, now we're going to define spaced retrieval practice or spaced learning. The difference with retrieval practice and spaced retrieval practice is what you might think. There is more space in between when it has been taught and when you are reviewing it. So material is reviewed or retrieved in spaced intervals over time. So our goal with review, and I think you would agree with this as you put in the chat all the ways that you review, our goal with review is internalization and mastery, right? Why do we even teach vocabulary to begin with? Well, we want it to become part of the language use of our learners, right? That's the goal. So spacing plays a crucial role in the gradual assimilation of information, which is essential for embedding new vocabulary into the long-term memory of ESL learners. Focus on long-term, right? We want it to be something that they are able to retrieve whenever they need it. When combined with retrieval practice, spacing provides a strong scaffold that promotes internalization and effective retrieval of vocabulary. And so this combined approach engages learners in deeper interaction with the material and moves beyond mere recognition to the level of mastery necessary for effective language use. You know, if you've studied another language, that there's a difference between recognition and mastery, right? And so we are going for internalization and mastery with our English learners. That's what we want, right? We want it to be there for them to retrieve whenever they need it. So that's the goal. Well, what's the problem? How do we normally teach vocabulary? Well, we teach a lesson, right? We're all about real world skills in adult education. And so we teach a lesson on shopping, which is, a real world skill that students need to know how to do and need the language for. Someone says Saxon math is good at doing this. Yes, I can make sure that the slides go out also with the recording when it goes out as well. So we often teach that vocabulary, like if we're teaching shopping, right? We teach that in context within one unit or lesson only. And then that's it. The contextualized vocabulary is never retrieved or used again. After students switch to a new context, you're not talking about shopping anymore. The next week, you're talking about getting a job or whatever. And so your vocabulary has changed, which that kind of review makes it less likely that that vocabulary will be retained and actually become part of students' language use. Okay, so that's the problem. And you might have guessed it, that the solution is spaced retrieval practice. One part of the solution, right, is spaced retrieval practice. So Strong has done a lot of work around this topic of research, and I really appreciated a lot of what he had to say because it was in a context, in an adult ed context. And he said, by encouraging active recall of previously learned words, this technique strengthens the retention and retrieval processes, providing a strong basis for advanced language comprehension and usage. Okay, so that's the why. That's a short, quick review of the literature. Why are we talking about this today? And now we're going to switch to practical, how it works. Teachers are always practical, right? You want to leave a webinar with something that you can immediately implement and use in your classroom tomorrow. So the first strategy that we're going to talk about with spaced retrieval practice is called brain dumps. So what this is you have taught a lesson, you've finished a unit, you've taught a lesson on a specific topic, and then you wait. There's differing views on how much time you wait. The general literature seems to agree that like at least 10 days to 2 weeks is a good time that it actually would be defined as spaced retrieval practice. You could even go further from the time you taught it to the time you implement these strategies in the classroom. So students with brain dumps, it kind of is what it sounds like. Students are kind of checking to see what's in their brain, and they're putting it out, dumping it out by writing it down. So students are given a time frame. And then if we're talking about vocabulary, they write down the vocabulary words they remember. You know, you're on lesson 3. You say to the students, I'm going to ask you to write down all the vocabulary words that you remember from unit 1 and give them a certain amount of time, right? I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes, and you're going to write down all of the vocabulary words you remember from our unit 2 weeks ago. And then what this does is this helps identify the vocabulary vocabulary which was retained, and the vocabulary from that lesson that still needs to be retained, right? So I think there's a typo on that slide. I apologize, but it can help identify that, right? And this doesn't have to take up a lot of time. This could be for 5 minutes or 7 or 8. I usually tend to do like a 6 to 8 minute time frame on this. And so it doesn't have to be long, but it kind of will help identify which words are in the long-term memory of the students, which words have been internalized and mastered from that lesson that you're asking them to think back to, and which words do they still need to help with? Do they still need to practice more? Do they still that haven't really been internalized yet? All right, so that's the first strategy. The second strategy is low stakes quizzes, and it is just as it sounds, quizzes that are low stakes. So this is a little bit more of a structured opportunity for recall of vocabulary. And I know a lot of times in adult education classes, it's not graded. But if you are in a setting where you do grades, if students know that this is ungraded, it could be less stressful for them. But it's an opportunity for students to use vocabulary right away if you're doing retrieval practice, or spaced retrieval practice if you're doing it a couple weeks removed. It also gives an opportunity for immediate instructor feedback, right? Students can know, it's an immediate read on whether or not students have internalized the vocabulary or not and are able to use it. With the brain dumps, I don't necessarily collect those. With the low stakes quizzes, this would be something that I would see, even if it's ungraded. And, if you use an LMS, sometimes if you're in a community college and they have an LMS, and sometimes adult ed programs use those, sometimes not, but you could also have it auto graded. So it takes up less time for you. And so that's just a good opportunity for you to see, wow, well, half of my class doesn't seem to have internalized or mastered this vocabulary from a month ago. And so what can we do, to help remedy that? And the third strategy that we're going to talk about is one that I'm sure you've used for other things. Think, write, pair, share. And I'm just going to check the chat. Okay. A lot of people are talking about groundwork, which I've never heard of. So have to check into that. A lot of people saying they use that. Lisa says, recently I added having students write on a small handheld whiteboard, and I'm amazed how much the English vocabulary retention improved by having everyone write their answers versus listening to someone speak. Okay. And I don't know, Lisa, if that was done like with space in between or not. So let's talk about think, write, pair, share in the context of a strategy for using spaced retrieval practice. If you ask students to dwell on a particular topic, and I will give you an example of this that a friend of mine used in her class, but you ask them to dwell on a particular topic studied in the class at least 2 weeks ago, and students come up with as many facts and ideas and vocabulary words as they can, and then they pair up with a partner or small group to share what they know, and then students can help others identify gaps. And again, this isn't necessarily something that you're going to see as an instructor, but as you kind of hear students in their groups sharing, right, at the end of this think/write pair share, you're going to get an idea of which vocabulary words have been internalized and mastered and which ones haven't. So this is also, an opportunity for students to it not just be an activity that they're doing alone, right? With the brain dump and with the low stakes quizzes, those are kind of activities that they're working on alone. And with this one, they're sharing out immediately with a classmate or with a group of classmates. So this is an example that a friend of mine used. She was teaching like a NRS level 4 class, like a high intermediate 2, and the lesson was on soft skills, vocabulary around soft skills in the workplace. And she had taught that lesson a few weeks prior. And so what she asked the students to do was to write down the answer to the question, what skills do you remember? What soft skills do you remember that are important? And then students wrote down what they remembered, and then they discussed in pairs or small groups and shared out with the whole class. So, you could space this out as far as you wanted, but this is just a practical example. We know that soft skills are covered in like almost all the adult ed curriculums, right? So it's a popular topic, especially in those higher levels, that you could easily implement as a think, pair, share activity for spaced retrieval practice. All right, so we've already been sharing in the chat, which is great. But if you, now that you've heard the strategies, you realize, oh yeah, I've used some of those strategies. Maybe you've even done spaced retrieval practice and you just didn't realize it. So if you could share in the chat which strategies of these maybe you have used for spaced retrieval practice, or now that you've heard how to use the strategies for spaced retrieval practice, maybe some of the strategies that you want to try. So you can answer that in the chat. Thanks, Ahu. Okay, somebody trying to figure out groundwork. So somebody will have to provide some technical assistance there. Okay, brain dumps quizzes used. Okay, somebody has used low stakes quizzes. Julie says, I like the last activity, but just because the students remember words doesn't mean they can understand them or use them. How do you address that? Yeah. So Julie, when I've done the low stakes quizzes, I guess that kind of addresses that more because that's asking them to use the words in context, which, you know, if they're using them in context rather than just writing down words, you have a better idea on whether they understand them, right? Obviously, like a gap fill is not, if you have the words there for them, then that's not really spaced retrieval practice. But when I've done low stakes quizzes, I've done it like that, where they're having to use words and sentences. So that gives you a little better read on whether they understand and can use. Susan says, think, pair, share. Have implemented all three. I have used think, write, pair, share. So that's great. So what I want you to think about is you've already used these strategies. How could you now use these strategies and implement spaced retrieval practice, right? Quizzes. I guess you're talking about low stakes quizzes. Okay, somebody shared a link for groundwork. I use these strategies, but like many things, I forget to use them. Thanks for the reminder. Eileen says low stakes quizzes, used quizzes. We'll try the other two, all three online quizzes. Okay, thanks, Karen. Yeah, I have used most of these, but the key was they weren't spaced that much. I think the spaced part is the key. Yeah, and that's what we're talking about. So these aren't revolutionary strategies, but using them in the context of space retrieval practice is kind of a different thing that I don't think a lot of people have done. Brain dump, all three. I think pair share, think write share. And I know how it is to go to a webinar and be like, I didn't learn anything new. So hopefully, even though the strategies weren't new, it's new. The space retrieval practice part is new. Think, pair, share, and non-graded activity quizzes, dictation, free writing, topic writing. We'll use the pair and share more often. They really do enjoy this. Okay, there are 54 more messages. So yes, so that's what I wanted you to really hit you today is how you can use strategies that you're already using and just use them a bit differently for space retrieval practice. So now we're going to demo this. And you're not going to get to share what you did because I think there are almost 200 people here. You're not going to get to share what you did on Thursday, May 30th. However, I want to demo the brain dump strategy for you. And I would like you to write down everything you can remember that you did 2 weeks ago today. The day was Thursday, May 30th, and you can't look back at your phone calendar or your work calendar. And what we are going to share in the chat, we're not going to share what you did 2 weeks ago, but we are going to share how this felt for you after you go through this process. So I'm going to set my timer for 90 seconds. And I just want you to write down everything you can remember that you did 2 weeks ago today on Thursday, May 30th. So about another minute. You don't have to write what you did 2 weeks ago. but I am going to ask you to respond to how it felt when we're done. All right. So I love it how some of you are sharing all that you did that day. So it's been 90 seconds. So some of you, a few people said, I have no idea. It's easy if like you know that that was a Thursday and you teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? That's a little easier if you have kind of a regular schedule like that. Somebody said they subbed. Sherry says we don't listen very well. No, that's okay. Um, Days blur into each other. Okay, so Marissa remembers that she had a class Wednesday the 29th, but not Thursday. So how did that exercise feel? Were you like, oh crap, I don't remember anything? So respond to that question. How did that make you feel when I asked you to think about what you did on Thursday, May 30th? Okay, Stephanie says it was difficult for me without being able to go back to my calendar as a reference point. Yeah, I do that, right? Um, okay, lots of people talking about what they did. Oh, Brandon, you even remember what you did that day in class. That's pretty impressive. I don't have a clue. Sad. Okay. Picked up my kitten. Can't remember. Okay, Susan, thanks. Yeah, Susan says it felt blurry. Marilu, I only remembered I went to work. Felt frustrating. Yeah, felt frustrating. Very hard to think back and remember. Yeah. Somewhat refreshing and laughable. Yeah, true, Melinda. I gave up. Felt scary. I felt old. Totally blank. Black hole. Scary. Difficult. Right. So, empty brain feeling. So, like, I think it's good to practice a strategy like that because um, somebody said they felt proud, and I won't catch all the comments, but it gives us an idea of how our students feel, right? When we ask them to do that. Um, and you know, they're not just taking in the English in your class, right? They have lives, we know this, jobs, children, families, you know, they have all kinds of other things um, going on. So it's good to put ourselves in the places of our students to sort of, you know, help empathize with how they feel. Somebody, Emily says, I appreciate being able to feel how our students feel. Okay. And lots of other responses, but so that's just like that's a demo of one strategy that might give you an idea of how your students might feel worried, frustrated, right? That they couldn't remember. But it's just space retrieval practice in action. And so I just wanted to give you a chance to try it out. All right, any questions or comments at this point? I do have my sources listed for you on a Padlet, and you can reference the Padlet. Ahu, if you wouldn't mind dropping the link to the Padlet in the chat. You also can get the Padlet by using this QR code, but we do have a little bit of time. So if anybody has questions or comments that you would like to share. I'm not sure about the certificate. I do think you get proof of attendance, Andrea. Any comments or questions that anyone has, you can drop those in the chat. Why wouldn't you retrieve immediately with repetition? So I'm not saying don't use retrieval practice immediately with repetition. You certainly can. But the whole argument today was that by spacing review of material, that the mastery and the internalization over the long term is better. Are there review strategies that we could suggest to help them do better? You mean to help them perform better when they do the spaced retrieval practice? So I think the regularity of doing this will help them do better, Roberta, because when you go through that process of retrieving further back over time, then it becomes, the lift becomes a little bit lighter and it doesn't feel so overwhelming. I think it's more overwhelming with when this is new, a new practice. And so when you start to implement this in your classroom, I think it becomes, my experience has been that it becomes a lighter lift for students and it becomes easier. Thank you, Dina. And Ahu dropped the Padlet again. Is this strategy more effective when this is something you do regularly and the students anticipate it? Yes. There is, Julie, there is research that would say that as this is implemented as a regular practice, it becomes more effective for students over time. Thank you, Deborah. Do you give students a heads up? I don't if it's the first time I'm doing this. Of course, if it's something you do regularly, then they may know to come to expect it, right? Alan, does spaced repetition work better for specific things like vocab or more complicated things like grammar? I don't know from a research point of view that I can answer that, but I would say that you could try it and see what happens. The concept of spacing information, I think, could be used for a lot of different things, not just vocabulary. But as far as the difference in what the research shows in vocabulary versus grammar, I don't know that there's a major discrepancy. Do you talk? Yes. So when Mary says, do you talk with students about the reason for doing spaced retrieval practice? Yes. So when I first came into this research a couple years ago, and I did this for the first time with my class, they said, "Oh, you're going to use us as an experiment." And I said, "Well, I want to see if this works." So I do talk with students about the reason. Of course, it's easier to do that, depending on the level of the students. In the levels that I teach now, I can very easily do that, explain the reason for spaced retrieval practice. I will make sure you get a copy of the slides. Teresa says priming the pump and reintroducing the topic. I mean, I guess you don't want to do a review and then do the spaced retrieval practice, right? Because that kind of defeats the purpose. Might motivate students to review on their own. Recent arrivals. So, Amy, this isn't about translanguaging, but I think if they are using their Creole, sometimes that can be a good strategy for them to help support one another. I am all about leveraging the strengths of the first language. Classroom with new students entering all the time. That's true. Yeah, you're not going to ask a student to retrieve something from 2 weeks ago if it's rolling enrollment and they weren't there 2 weeks ago. Thank you, Dee. Just trying to keep up with the comments. Yeah. Pimsleur was using spaced retrieval practice decades ago. He researched and documented the method. Okay. I'll have to look into that, Frederick. I know when I have talked about this with instructors here in the US, it's in ESL circles. It wasn't super well known. All right. Well, I'd love to connect with you on the Padlet. There is also my LinkedIn, and I would love to stay connected. I hope you found something today that you can use in your classroom that will help to benefit your students, right? We know that's why we're all here, is because we're passionate about wanting to see our students be successful. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. There is a quick poll, if you could take that before you leave. We do send certificates for attending the webinar. Those are sent at least 24 hours following the live webinar after it ends. So you should receive that tomorrow afternoon. We also provide a link and the slides and resources and that sort of information. We also upload that on our website as well. I think that covers the questions. And everyone have a great rest of your week. And hopefully you guys are getting some sunshine and warmer weather. And everyone enjoy the rest of their summer.
My LinkedIn is on the Padlet, so I saw that in the chat. Thanks, everybody.
Fantastic work, Betsy. Take care.
Bye.